Hey, welcome back to another episode of Necessary Roughness right here on the Bite Size Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, John Boyd, joined probably soon by my co-host, Ben Parker. But for now, we're just going to get the party started. Sound off in the chat if you're tuned in. Love to hear your takes on a championship weekend. And we will start there. I'm sure you've seen a lot of coverage, recap of these games. Cat going crazy. But let's start with Commanders-Eagles here. This is like the closest. This has got to be the closest 32-point game I've ever seen. It was a drumming by the end of it, but for, 2.5 quarters, it kind of you kind of still felt like Washington could really make a game of it. I don't. Maybe that was just me. I don't know. It felt very contentious for most of the game, and it felt like it could have swung on a few key plays, which is insane to say when a team lost by 4 scores. But hey, I think the Commanders, gave a pretty good effort. They were punching above their weight, and we all knew that. And they had been for weeks at that point. But going into the link for an NFC Championship game, something that as a Vikings fan, I certainly revere. And it's a tough environment, division opponent. The running game they have, the injury to Sam Cosmi, when you've got Jalen Carter on the other side of the line of scrimmage. It's tough to overcome. And Jaden Daniels played a really, really good game. But for Philly, it was an extremely complete game. They were able to run the ball as much as they wanted to, even with the goofy, Landon Dickerson starting at center, which, for what it's worth, I think when they picked him, because he played plenty of a center in college as well, he felt like the heir apparent to Kelsey at that moment, a guy who you start at left guard for a season, maybe 2, and then he kicks into center when Kelsey does retire. They wound up hitting on Juergens too, so it was a moot point, and Juergens did end up having to come in for Dickerson as Juergens suited up but just didn't start. Overcame that. Things still worked out just fine for him. Early on, the Commanders' defense was making a few plays that kind of gave you hope, but it was just the Philly offense just feels like an avalanche by a certain point. If they get out to even a slight lead, it's just, here they come. And that's what it turned into. But it was a great game as well from Jalen Hurts. And I think, he's been getting a lot of flack from, a lot of it stems from his play individually and isolated, but it also comes from, folks contextualizing his play with all the talent around him and saying, if such and such quarterback was in this situation, they'd be this much better, that sort of thing. And I've been guilty of that in the past. And I still think that to be true for a lot of quarterbacks. Like if you put Justin Herbert in the Philly offense, not only does that unlock a completely separate pathway for them, just as a pocket passer and the kind of throws he's able to make, especially far hash, which is something Jalen Hurts doesn't really have access to more often than not. And it's why, when he's pressured, he's more often than not rolling right. And once he does so, it's a half-field read, not as dynamic of a scramble drill as a passer, but obviously a great runner. That long run at the beginning of the game really set the tone, and I think Hurts deserves plenty of credit for that win. And even if he is sort of like a middle of the pack quarterback, especially in these big games when the infrastructure is the way it is, he's been a guy who's not losing you games. He played out of his mind in that 2022 Super Bowl, and his fumble was the sole mistake, and that did cost him the game. But that didn't stem from his limitations as a passer. It's it comes with the territory playing football. There are going to be fumbles, there are going to be drops, so it's tough to really sting him for that. But great game from the Eagles. 2022 rematch upcoming, and that's all I've got on that one. Bills Chiefs was, of course, a lot more entertaining by the end of it, and it's really tough to kind of nitpick what the Bills did this season and the way the season ended. Better passer than you, Nate. I don't know. You should see the couch quarterback drills I do around the house when I'm watching a guy who squats 650 and bitching about his limitations. But thanks for tapping in, Nate. Another member of the Bite Size team, keeping me humble. But for this game, it's we're going to hear a ton about the Chiefs over the next couple of weeks, and they press the right buttons at the right times, and that's been the story of their what at this point we can call a dynasty, for sure. Especially if we started anointing that Patriots dynasty after their 3 and 4 years from 01 to 04. And they went on a Super Bowl drought until 2014. So you've got to give them as much credit as is due. The pressure that Spagnuolo drew up to seal the game was unbelievable. The way it was a 4-by-1 alignment for Buffalo, and they sent an overload blitz from the weak side. And what that does to kind of muddy things up is when you get into a condensed formation like that, the prevailing wisdom from the defensive side is to blitz from that, when you're in a tight alignment, that is, to blitz from that strong side, the bunch side or the trip side, or when you had Shakir in the orbit motion, it turned into a 4-by-1. And if your pressure is coming from that side, that's usually where Josh is going to have all his hot answers, because there's more routes behind those blitzers. But what Kansas City did on that play, which was ingenious by Spagnuolo, and again, he knows when to reach all the way to the bottom of his bag, and he saves those bottom of the bag tricks for these moments. He's probably been sitting on this pressure all season, and it just came at the perfect time. You had 2 free rushers in Josh Allen's face, and while he did have hot answers to his left to the passing strength, the immediacy of those free rushers, because they completely broke the pass protection rules for the Bills. They actually, I think they half slid to the left, away from the overload pressure. And when those guys arrived in Josh Allen's face, all of a sudden he starts bailing right and ends up getting a ball to Kincaid that was very catchable, but it kind of forces him into that creation mode, gets him off schedule, turns his entire body away from his hot answers, and ball game. But, there are people who are talking about or questioning Sean McDermott's coaching ability and whether or not they should move on from him. I think that would be insanely premature, and really, really moment too, because yes, it's a disappointing season, but consider the context of this offseason when a lot of really, really smart people kind of saw this as a reset year for Buffalo, with all of the long tenured veterans from the defense moving on, Stephon Diggs moving on. It just didn't seem like Josh Allen had the pieces around him that he had in the past to go on those runs. And you're right back in the AFC Championship against the best team of the decade. And that's the team that beat you. Like, yes, you haven't been able to slay the dragon, but there aren't as many coaches as you think there are that are going to get you to the castle gates in the first place. And, you know, the princess is still locked away in the highest tower for at least one more season. But I think you just keep building on this. You don't just pull the plug on a coach who has had such sustained success for you, who has been the architect of in incomprehensibly consistent defense, given the kind of exodus of all that long-standing talent. He's been able to. I mean, this was a fine defense with Damar Hamlin and Taylor Rapp at safety, and really without a physical presence on the interior of the defensive line to help in the run game. A bunch of injuries, particularly at the beginning of the season, that you had to overcome. So I don't like any of that discourse around moving on from McDermott just yet. I think it's just he's been unfortunate to be coaching in the same conference as Andy Reid. Josh Allen has been unfortunate to be born around the same time as Patrick Mahomes. So it's just something that they're going to have to tinker with, and it you don't need to overhaul things. You know, hang on to the baby when you throw the bathwater out, because it's just little tweaks. You're so close. There's no reason to take 2 steps back in order to try to take 3 steps forward when you can maybe just get that 1 step forward and get the leg up on them. But that's going to be a rivalry for as long as those two are under center, and as long as, well, I mean, it might outlast Andy Reid, but Andy Reid at this point can really just kind of, I mean, he has so many things over the years that he's installed with Patrick Mahomes that at a certain point, I don't know how involved he really has to be, particularly throughout the regular season. Like, I don't know how much of workload Andy Reid's going to have to shoulder to keep this thing going. Like, if he were to coach until Mahomes retires, until he's 82 or whatever it is, I mean, it's probably going to be something he could sustain, because you have that coach on the field in Mahomes. You're going to have Creed Humphrey for the duration of Mahomes' career, more than likely. So the offense is sort of autopilot at this point. And whoever you want to plug in there at the skill positions, and whoever you'd like to fill out the rest of the offensive line with, I think you're just kind of push the first domino and watch the offense go. So, I mean, yeah, this is going to be the marquee matchup of the NFL for the rest of those two guys' careers. And before we jump topics, let's get our resident Chiefs expert in, talk a little bit about his favorite team on the way to their 3rd straight Super Bowl before we get into postmortems, and then talk a little bit of coaching carousel. Ben Parker, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, man. I think I'm sideways. I'm not sure why that is. So phone's not cooperating. I apologize for being late. I got meetings everywhere, but here we are, man. Yeah, thank y'all for having me on.
No
Always a pleasure. We're going to rock and roll this. But, yeah, hats off to the Chiefs. You're right about everything you said, Chiefs and Bills there. This is one of the matchups over on the AFC side. And, boy, we saw that all through the 90s when you had – heck, we saw it in the 80s on the NFC side when you had the Redskins, the Bears, the Giants, and the 49ers all packed together on one side. We saw it in the 90s when you had the 49ers, the Cowboys, and the Packers all stuffed together on one side. We've seen it for years.
Mm-hmm.
We saw it in the 2000s on the AFC side with Roethlisberger and Brady and Manning all stuck on one side. So here we are again with the Bills and the Chiefs and even the Ravens all smashed together here. And it's fun to watch, but it kind of sucks to be the loser time and time again, man, because you can be great and still lose. You know, go back to the 90s with Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls. You know, how many great Hall of Fame players didn't get a championship solely because of Michael Jordan. You know, I mean, Karl Malone, John Stockton, Sean Kemp, and Gary Payton. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. So it kind of sucks, but it's a great matchup.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even you could do Steelers Raiders in the 70s. I mean, there's always going to be these two heavyweights, and I mean, the Steelers got 4 of them in that decade. The Raiders got 2, but I mean, you're gonna have to keep the Chiefs out of the Super Bowl one of these years if you want to get one for yourself. So, you know, I think. Like I said about the Bills, I think that it's like you are clearly the closest team to dethroning the Chiefs, and that's not even across your conference, that's across the entire NFL at this point. I mean, we'll see what the Eagles have for them in the rematch here, but I don't know, man. Like, you got the running game to where you wanted it. They didn't run it much in the first half, but then they opened up that second half. The Bills did after that really nice drive to close out the first half to get it within 5, because 21-10 is kind of scary, but you close out the half, you get a big touchdown drive, don't get the 2, but then you come out and they decided in the second half that they were going to establish the run. It was legitimately like 9 or 10 runs in a row. With a couple, you know, like quick screens and stuff in there, but the run game and what the Bills have been able to kind of establish and unlock for themselves with that run game, along with Josh Allen, is something that I think you've got to keep your foot on the gas with as you move forward. And I think you want to get away from the committee a little bit. As big of plays as Ty Johnson and Ray Davis made throughout the season, there's no reason James Cook should have a 50% snap share in the biggest game of the season. You know, I mean, he's your second best skill player on the offensive side. So, you know, I think there are going to be plenty of long looks in the mirror, but at the end of the day, you don't have to tear anything down. You're in a pretty comfortable spot from a cap perspective going forward for a team that's been contending for so many years. You do have some flexibility. You've drafted pretty well over the last couple of seasons. Brandon Beane has done a pretty good job to keep everything stocked. You know, having workable backups, particularly at off-ball linebacker, to weather the Matt Milano and the Terrell Bernard injuries, and be viable.
Yeah.
And I think you just got to keep plugging away. You got to stay the course, and you've got to allow Sean McDermott to go down with the ship at this point. You know, I don't think there's anybody, and Joe Brady's coming back as well, who spurned the Saints, which is where he actually got his start under Sean Payton. So that tells you a little bit about probably both the unattractiveness of the Saints job, but also that Joe Brady does want to continue to build with what he has laid the foundation for with Josh and under Sean McDermott. So I don't know. I think it's tough to paint it with rose-colored glasses after this loss, and kind of weighing all the preceding losses to Kansas City, and kind of, you know, confronting the weight of all that all at once at the end of that game. But you're one of the 4 best teams in the league, pretty much any given season since Josh hit his stride in year 2. So I think there's some overreactions going around, but I understand the pain. Find time for a Bills postmortem. You know your team, the Chiefs, as well as anybody. If you were to put yourself in Buffalo's shoes, what do you think they need to finally get through the Chiefs. Did anything stick out at you that maybe if there was another button they were able to push in this matchup or preceding matchups that would have gotten them over the hump?
Yeah, there's a couple things, but the number one thing is patience. All right, because you already nailed it. Okay, listen, if I could go get a better head coach than McDermott, I'd do it in a heartbeat. But there's very few of those, and they're all employed by other teams. All right, so it's just not going to happen. Right, so you need patience first of all. Enjoy it, because how many franchises? How long did Buffalo go without even being in the playoffs, man? I mean, not even a sniff of a hint of anything. You don't want to go back to that. So you're not going to. For the next decade, 8 to 10 years, you should be really good, okay? So just be patient, enjoy the winning, even though you're not climbing the mountain yet. That's the number one thing. Got to do that. But after that, there's a couple of things. The defense still doesn't have standout players necessarily. So starting with the secondary, if you could find somebody in the secondary who's a legit elite-ish kind of a guy, doesn't have to be shut down. He just can be really good at zone cover, but somebody on the back end, all you're looking for is one or two more plays, and you beat the Chiefs instead of losing to them, So that's one. If you can ever find an edge rusher, and believe me, they've tried, but if you can ever find a real true pop off the edge rusher, like an Abdul Carter sitting there in the draft, you'd have to trade up a king's ransom to get him. But if you could do that, just imagine the pop it would provide. Again, you're not going to crush Kansas City, but one or two plays, man, that's all you need to tilt it, So those two things. The offensive line is good, but still not dominant. So keep working on that if you can. If you find another guy to plug in there to continue to upgrade that, those are the three things. But you're really close. So don't get too antsy and mess it up. But if you can upgrade, like a serious upgrade somewhere there, I would look at that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, if when you bring up Abdul Carter, he has that kind of burst and bend and speed and agility that a Von Miller kind of has. Like if you had prime Von Miller,
yes,
I think that kind of because you've got these strong, long arm, walk you back, condense the pocket kind of edge rushers in Greg Rousseau and AJ Epineza. But you do kind of feel the need for that quick pressure guy, the guy who can really bend the corner, a guy who has the pass rush repertoire to set guys up on the edge consistently. Maybe someone who can attack from the wide nine and really use his speed downhill. And then you're in a situation where you really are able to weaponize guys like Epineza and Rousseau over the guards on passing downs. Kick those guys in like so many, like you do with a Zadarius Smith type, or like the Vikings did with Everson Griffin for years, or Justin Tuck back in the Spags days on passing down. So
way back,
if you yeah, exactly. For whatever reason, I couldn't conjure any modern examples, but you get my drift. But I think a complement to the existing group that's a little bit younger would be great. And you got to wonder how this would have went if Christian Benford didn't go down early.
Yeah,
because
that could be the one or two plays right there.
Boy. Yeah, boy, oh boy, was Pat Mahomes aware that Christian Benford was not in the game. Because Kaiir Elam was picked on probably more by the broadcast team than the Chiefs, but he was picked on all night. The broadcast team was showing lowlights of him when he wasn't even targeted. They were just showing guys getting separation on him on the backside of a play. It was pretty brutal, but yeah, if Benford is in there, and I think if you go get, like you alluded to, a real playmaking, kind of ceiling raising safety, doesn't necessarily have to be the Javon Holland of this class, but if you can make a play at him, I think that's a route to take. You've also got guys like Malachi Starks in the draft. I've heard Jahdae Barron might be a safety in the NFL. the way guys
Probably.
are talking about him. But
Safety
you've
slot, yeah.
got some, sure, you've got some, pretty solid. Rasul Douglas is a pending free agent. I think you feel really good about Benford and Teron Johnson. So if Douglas walks, and he did have a pretty good season, but if Douglas walks, you're going to need another boundary corner. But this is what, we have to kind of think pretty hard for, what the real true blue needs are.
Right.
And I think, kind of a catch-all for it is probably impact players on the defensive side of the ball. And then maybe on the offensive side, whether it's Amari Cooper or someone Amari Cooper adjacent who you actually plan to feature in your offense instead of again, what your one of your best skill players is playing like 50-60% of snaps at a certain point. Not that Mac Hollins can't block his ass off, but come on, can we play some professional football at a certain point and throw the pill around a little bit? Like, let's get some real if you get one real pass catcher for Josh, not necessarily a Diggs type, but a guy who can win one-on-ones and separate. While Keon Coleman's a great contested catch winner, Khalil Shakir's a really good separator. I think you need the combination of the two to be your kind of alpha, and then that unlocks a lot for him. But again, like, it was a great offense without any of that. It was a passable defense without any of that. So, everybody, Bills Nation, let's just, spare the nearest folding table and just take a breath and just, you're so close. You're closer than a lot of teams are. All right. You want to talk a little bit of coaching?
Let's do it, man. let's talk some moving parts here.
Moving parts. And, there are some of these that are much more interesting than others at face value. But let's kind of briefly talk through them all, and then we'll kind of give the folks at home our favorite hire, whether that's coordinator or head coach, and then that'll probably take us to about the end of the show. But I have my list here. So Atlanta brings in Jeff Ulbrich as defensive coordinator, interim head coach for the Jets, and defensive coordinator when Saleh was still there. So, you're going to bring some Saleh staples over that way. 4 down, rushing 4, willing to play man on the back end. And, for the personnel you've got, probably not ideal yet, but you're going to go out and get some pass rushers this offseason. I think we'll be all right. So that's a lukewarm hire. That's fine. The Chicago Bears obviously bring in Ben Johnson, who I'm pretty sure was Lex Luthor on Smallville. And then Dennis Allen comes over to be defensive coordinator, which I think was an incredible hire to come over as DC. It's always great to, especially if you're a head coach that's going to be calling offensive plays, to bring in a coordinator with head coaching experience to sort of help the game management kind of stuff. But then you're also going to have an experienced defensive play caller who might have been the best defensive play caller on the market. When you look at what he did for the Saints defenses when they still had talent on the right side of 30. He fielded some really good units over those years, and then didn't quite work out at as the head coach there. But I think a lot of that falls on the front office. And then Declan Doyle will be your non-play calling OC under Ben Johnson. Declan Doyle is 28 years old. So he was the pass game under Sean Payton in Denver. Am I right about that? No. Tight ends coach in Denver? I want to say he was the tight ends coach in Denver. And something I heard, I think Robert Mays of The Athletic actually said this, and I thought it was a really astute point. In the way things are trending is sometimes the tight ends coach role isn't necessarily a guy who was a tight end or has this, transcendent understanding of the position. It's just your ideas guy. It's your kind of offensive coordinator adjacent kind of protege type. Because as a tight ends coach, you're going to have your hands in and you're going to be in the meetings of the run game and the pass game pretty equally. So you're going to have a really holistic understanding of the offense, probably more so than any other position coach. So they use that position. A lot of folks use that position as sort of a pipeline, a coaching developmental track for a guy who you think might be able to call plays in the future, but also a guy who you think is going to be able to contribute to kind of the brainstorming and the collaborative process of putting offensive game plans together. Ben Johnson started as a tight ends coach. A lot of Dan Campbell, tight ends coach. Granted, he's not calling plays, but he got all the way to the top. There are many, many more examples of coaches starting as tight ends coach and eventually becoming play callers or offensive assistants or stuff like that. So I do think that's interesting. Just didn't quite see Declan Doyle coming. Cincinnati parted ways with Lou Anarumo as DC. They bring in Al Golden, Notre Dame defensive coordinator. So that's interesting. We'll see how that transition goes for him. The Dallas Cowboys don't fucking care. Jerry Jones doesn't care about anything but the star on the helmet. They didn't exhaust any resources in their coaching search. They kind of let all these marquee names pass them by, and maybe some of those folks weren't keen on working with Jerry Jones or working under Jerry Jones, and that might be a factor. But you kind of go through this whole search, and then you end up hiring somebody who works down the hallway to be your head coach, who also had no outside interest for a head coaching position from any other team.
None.
And excellent lineage. Marty's NFL Films Gold. Eminem has a line even about cursing at you players worse than Marty Schottenheimer. I always remember. I'll never forget that line. But anyway, he was obviously great, and people seem to really like Brian Schottenheimer as well. Glowing reviews from everybody who's worked with him. Blah blah blah. But again, this doesn't seem like you said last offseason, Jerry, when you said, hey, we're all in, and then you didn't spend a dime to improve your team and double down on, the existing dogma of the organization. And now you kind of do another half-assed thing. I do like bringing Eberflus over as DC. And that's that same kind of thing. You bring over a DC with head coaching experience who can call the shit out of a defense. Eberflus's defenses were never the issue. It was game management, clock management, the locker room leadership, essentially, right? So if you bring that guy into the building, I think you're going to feel pretty good about it. Internal promotion going with Brian Schottenheimer over Mike Zimmer is kind of interesting. Zimmer's got to be pissed. We'll hear about it in a few years. And then Detroit had a big brain drain with Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn heading out. New DC is their spent the last 3 seasons as their linebackers coach. Kelvin Shepard played linebacker for a few seasons in the NFL, I think with Buffalo and a couple other teams. I think kind of a journeyman linebacker, early 2010s. So you keep some continuity there. And this isn't a direct internal promotion at OC, but they do bring in John Horton as offensive coordinator, who did spend 2022 with Detroit under Dan Campbell as a senior offensive assistant. So Dan kind of trying to, keep as much continuity as he can. Hank Fraley back as offensive line coach is a big win. He was getting looks for offensive coordinator positions. So you're able to salvage some of that. But we'll see how much effect that has on it. Norton, this is who I was thinking of when I misspoke earlier. John Morton spent the last 2 seasons as the pass game coordinator in Denver under Sean Payton. The Colts hire Lou Anarumo after parting ways with Gus Bradley after probably too many seasons with Gus Bradley. I texted our buddy Kev, our resident Colts expert, and I said, get ready to learn split field safety coverages, buddy, because we are going to get away from 50% cover 3. I guarantee it. But I like Anarumo. I think he can really put together a game plan when he's got some talent. Before the Browns just got the Browns, the family owning the Bengals, got rid of all his talent. He was really putting game plans together. Jacksonville Jaguars bring in Liam Cohen to the tune of much controversy after they did not fire Trent Baalke right before they began their coaching search. Liam Cohen interviewed with them, then was offered an extension with Tampa Bay to be the highest paid assistant in the NFL, contingent upon him not returning to Jacksonville for a second interview.
That's great.
and then it's incredible. In that same span of time, the Jaguars fire Trent Baalke, which changes the situation in Jacksonville. Now it's reported that they proposed Liam Cohen the opportunity to handpick his general manager that he'll be working with over there, and almost certainly pretty close to double the amount of money he would make as an offensive coordinator with Tampa. And now you get to go work with Trevor Lawrence, another first overall selection at quarterback. And Liam Cohen's track is really interesting. He's 39 right now. Spent some time coaching in college. He was at Kentucky and then went to the Rams in 2022, spent a season under Sean McVay as an offensive assistant, then went back to Kentucky as OC and oversaw the best season of Will Levis's collegiate or pro career, and then left Kentucky for the Tampa Bay OC job and knocked it out of the park, got the run game on track, weaponized the screen game, Baker 40 touchdowns, improved upon what Dave Canales had started. And there's 32 of these jobs. You got to take one when it's on the table. But it was just a really funny, like, Jason Light being like, I don't know, Liam's not answering my phone calls.
Hello.
And he's just meeting. He's just meeting with Shad Khan. But I don't know. He was up there with Ben Johnson for cringiest introductory interview. He did like a really goofy, forced Duval, and it was like, oh, dude, I've never seen a person in my life who looks more like a Liam than Liam Cohen. It's just, you could guess his name. I guarantee it. Vegas Pete Carroll. What do you think about Pete Carroll coming back and going to Vegas, working in part with Tom Brady? And now back in the same division as Harbaugh.
Yeah. I will say overall,
73.
and that's fantastic. 73. Overall, I was proud of a lot of these NFL franchises for making what I thought were at least solid football decisions, more so than I've seen in past years. I saw a little bit less of hiring guys who were getting their second chance and didn't deserve it, like flat out did not deserve it. I saw less of that. I saw less of taking chances to some degree on coordinators that nobody had really heard of or really were after too much. It seemed to be better football hires. Now, having said that, before I get into any specific names, not everybody can win. Even if everybody made a great decision, which they didn't. But even if everybody did, somebody's still got to win, somebody got to lose, right? So, just because you make a good coaching hire, you may be looking at 500 as an improvement the next 3 seasons because roster just ain't ready or you're in a tough division or whatever. So, having said that. So anyway, I like Pete Carroll to the Raiders. Roster is going to be their biggest problem. It's not going to be him. He didn't forget how to coach, so they'll be fine coaching wise. Roster wise, still lots of trouble there. I like Liam Cohen to the Jaguars. Now he's completely unproven as a head coach, so who knows? You never know on a guy until you give him a chance. But I like it to the Jaguars, even though it went about it really weird, right? Crazy how it went down. I like that they let go of Trent Baalke. I was telling them to do that. So were other people for many different reasons, but I like that they let go of Trent Baalke. So I like that. I love that the Bears got Ben Johnson. They got the big fish, all right? But again, there's no guarantee with the first-time guy that he's actually going to be good at this. But I like that they got him. One of my favorite moves is Robert Saleh back to the 49ers. I was really hoping for that. That's a good move there for the 49ers. So for them to be able to get a defensive coordinator back that they like and we're comfortable with, I think that's great for Shanahan. And Shanahan, who I mentioned during the last offseason, looks like he's really struggling with things, maybe a little bit too heavy. He also, for the first time, I think since 21, hired an offensive coordinator to kind of help with things on the offensive side too. So I like where they're going with that coaching staff. And then you mentioned the Bears picking up the defensive coordinator, the Saints' former head coach.
Dennis Allen.
I've lost his name. Yeah, Dennis Allen. Love that too. So a lot of good hires here I like. If McCarthy goes to the Saints, I can think of worse things for the Saints, okay? I'm not a huge McCarthy guy, but at least he's stable and he fits, right? So I'm okay with McCarthy. Probably the only thing – I didn't even touch the Cowboys. The Cowboys are crazy. We all know it. The only thing I think I'm unhappy with out of this coaching process is I like Aaron Glenn to the Jets too. I don't like that Brian Flores doesn't have a coaching job. I would have loved to see Brian Flores with the Raiders or the Saints, either one, or even the Jets. Go in there, kick some tail, race some cane. But, he's fine up there in Minnesota. He can wait another season or two. So that's my feeling on all of it. I liked most of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I do have – there are actually a few more hires I didn't get to. The Pete Carroll one I just really wanted to get your opinion on, because that one was out of left field a little bit for me. Like everybody who tabled Pete Carroll as an option, I was like, well, I don't really know about that. Here, before we get to the rest of the list, I've got a question from Lee. What's the Raiders GM name? Lee, that would be I think it's John Spytek. Spent a bunch of years, I think like 6 years, 7 years as the assistant GM for the Bucs under Jason Light, who I think particularly for GMs with, a really extended resume with one organization, I think in the conversation for the best GM of the last decade and a half, Jason Light in Tampa. I mean, what he did to build the team up to where it was ready to plop Tom Brady in there, and then what he's done since then to, take one of the best offensive lines in football that featured Ryan Jensen and Ali Marpet and Donovan Smith, that overlapped with Wirfs's rookie year when he played right tackle, to now arrive going into next season with 2 Pro Bowl caliber, one All-Pro, but 2 Pro Bowl caliber tackles. You've drafted Graham Barton to play center. You're getting some good play out of Ben Bredesen, Cody Mock. Like, this is almost a completely different offensive line, and it's really good again over the course of a couple of seasons. And then, all the other ancillary stuff they've done with the defense and how they've drafted, they've done a great job. So I think it's a really, really sharp hire. But to your follow-up question, Lee, I think it's a little Brady influence there, and rightfully so. I mean, this is a guy who was probably privy to, if not a part of, all of those meetings with Tom and Jason Light and all those vets. So it's got to be a guy Tom trusts, and it's the protege of a guy who Tom certainly trusts. So Feels like a Brady guy to me. A few more to round it out. Really funny Patriots hiring cycle. They they go from Belichick and they're like, all right, well, there goes our 2.5 decade Hall of Fame coach. Instead of going for a big fish, like a Vrabel that was available, we're going to promote from within a guy who we felt like is kind of the heir apparent for a few years here, Gerard Mayo. All right, the team wasn't good with a shit roster and a rookie QB and a bad offensive coordinator. We're going to just can him, and we're going to get back to the old ways, the only way we know how. And we're going to hire Mike Vrabel, who will subsequently hire Josh McDaniels to bring him in for his third stint as offensive coordinator of the New England Patriots. And then Vrabel just decides to bring over Terrell Williams, who was his defensive line coach in Tennessee, and spent some time previously as the defensive line coach of the Dolphins for 4 seasons, and has been the defensive line coach in Tennessee since 2018. And for all of the criticisms we have of the Titans as a whole, that defensive line has been good for a long time. So that hire makes sense, but it's just so funny that, all right, we had a coach GM hybrid for so long that just controlled everything. Let's kind of spread out the responsibility and get more, kind of minds involved with this, to then just go, all right, just kidding. Vrabel, it's your franchise. Bring in whoever you want to bring in. You'll have, veto power over draft picks. You'll be heavily involved in all the player acquisition. And, we're just going to hand it over to a guy we know, which is just extremely Patriots. The McDaniels hire was pretty funny when I heard that one. Aaron Glenn, keep it in the AFC East, goes to the New York Jets to be their new head coach. They haven't filled out the coordinators just yet. But man, I really like Aaron Glenn. I was saying all season, Ben Johnson might not be the best coordinator on his team. I think Aaron Glenn is going to bring I think he'll do a much better job than Johnson to set a culture, or at least it won't take him as long to. I think the presence he has, being a former player, and the mentality that he brings to a defense is going to rub off on those guys immediately. When you show up to a Sauce Gardner as a former defensive back yourself, who wants to really empower those guys, your corners, and say, hey, we're going to play a bunch of fuck you man coverage, and we're going to play hard, and we're going to play violently within the confines of the modern rules. You can still be violent. We're going to be about as violent as we can, and we're going to be in your face, in your jersey all game, and you're going to have to beat us. We're not going to give you anything. I think when you approach a defense that has the existing personnel of the Jets, it'll kind of reinvigorate the way they played for Saleh, who I think has a similar presence, not necessarily from a philosophical standpoint, but just from a mentality and a leadership standpoint. I think there's similar presences, and you saw the fall off from when Saleh was let go. So we'll see about the rest of that staff. And then in San Francisco has named its first offensive coordinator since 2021. And Mike McDaniel. There has not been a nominal offensive coordinator under Kyle Shanahan for 3 seasons, and now it is going to be Clay Kubiak. There's another one. The second son of Gary Kubiak, promoted pass game coordinator for a long time under Shanahan, gets that promotion. Obviously, Shanahan will still have play calling duties, but that's kind of cool. And then Saleh back, obviously, like you mentioned. And then Clay's big bro, Clint Kubiak, gets the Seahawks offensive coordinator job coming off of I think what he did with what he had at his disposal in New Orleans this season was great. I mean, the first 2 weeks when they were just running the piss out of the ball and pants the Cowboys and all that, I was just like, oh man, like I buried the Saints in the first week of shows we did. I said they were 1-0, and I was like, I voted them like the first team out of the playoffs before we, because we were just going to try to each week eliminate somebody and see if it comes back to bite us. And I did that with the Saints. It might have even been before week 1. And after week 2 in that Cowboys game, I was like, oh man, I might not know what I think I know, but I know what I thought I knew. There just wasn't enough there for him to sustain it. And obviously, when you ended up rolling Jake Haener out there and Spencer Rattler, it wasn't really in Clint's control anymore. But I think he did a good job with that group and like really creatively weaponized Taysom Hill down the stretch. And the Kubiak family, Clint and Gary, and, I'm sure Clay, I don't know much about Clay, but I'm sure having worked with Shanahan for as long as he had and having been raised by the same man as Clint was, I'm sure he's also one of those guys like Clint and like Gary who did a really good job to marry the run and pass game. They're going to come over to Seattle, and that's what Seattle's been really hurting for is, hey, we've got Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, and this is a bottom third run game. What's going on? So if Clint can come over, implement like Kenneth Walker in a wide zone heavy run scheme, I mean, get out of town. I think you feel pretty good about something like that. I don't even know how diverse you have to be. I just think you have to commit to it, and you have to have solid principles in place in order to weaponize two of the best players on your offense that haven't really gotten the shine.
Right.
And then you feel more comfortable with like a DK Metcalf trade to get some draft capital back. Really have JSN as the focal point. Draft a wide receiver. Let Tyler Lockett kind of live out the twilight of his career as a late down, first down getter out of the slot with a lot of free releases and don't let him. Tyler Lockett doesn't want to get hit. He'll go down, so he might have a long career. He'll go out of bounds. He knows he's 5'8" and 145 soaking wet. He's bigger than that. He's a real sized man, but he's little on the field. All right, quick question from Lee, and then we'll name our favorite hire of the cycle to this point. Don't you think that Glenn is a little too hard on the practice field? About half the guys reporting to him did end up on IR, didn't they, Lee? I really have a hard time pinpointing where those injuries stemmed from, but I don't think that's out of the question. That's a fair point to make. At least they won't be practicing on shitty MetLife grass. We'll get that. That'll help. All right, Ben. Of all those I listed, what's your favorite head coach hire? And then if you have another one that you really liked, feel free to shout it out. But let's stick to the head coach hires for our favorite.
I'll keep them both in Chicago, okay? Ben Johnson, again, he's unproven. So that's a major asterisk, right? But still, he was the big fish that everybody wanted, and Chicago got him, and they needed him to help with their rookie quarterback, second-year guy, and to upgrade that offense. They needed that. But my favorite coordinator hires right there was Dennis Allen, because how many times have we seen a guy, go look at Miami, who can coordinate the heck out of XO schemes and offenses, and they can't get it done on the defensive side? Or right the opposite. You've got a defensive coach who is brilliant at defense, and he just can't find that offensive coordinator to keep him competitive. So they lose, and out he goes, 3-4 years later. So that combination there in Chicago, and again, it's a tough division. It's a tough division. But that combination there in Chicago, I really like that. I think that's a great combination there. It gives you a chance, right? Really gives you a chance. A lot of potential there.
Yeah, I love that one. Another good shout from Lee. I thought Kubiak would have gotten the Saints job. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to see a lateral move for a guy who, maybe didn't earn necessarily a ton of head coaching interviews, but in-house, you'd think they would have liked what they saw from him, and especially not being able to, and they might have just waited too long. They might have thought they were going to get a Joe Brady from Buffalo.
Yeah.
They might have thought they were kind of in on the Liam Cohen sweepstakes, or maybe they thought they had a chance at Aaron Glenn. But yeah, I thought that was a little goofy too. Maybe Kubiak got the offer from Seattle and it was a pay raise, and he likes the personnel over there better. I think it'll give him. I mean, he would have been tying himself to the mast of a sinking ship were he to take the head coach job with the Saints, unless he was really given a long leash, because this is an organization that if they are going to be honest with themselves, they're going to start tearing shit down. And if he met with ownership, or he met with Mickey Loomis.
Mickey Loomis is there. So is Ireland as well.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Loomis. Okay, I was just making sure I got the name right. It sounded weird coming out of my mouth. But anyway, he could have met with those guys, and maybe they said, hey, we think we're pretty close, maybe just a couple tweaks here and there. And he might have said, well, you're not. I was trying to do the most I could with this personnel all season, and we're not close. And maybe he just, wanted something better to work with as a starting point. But yeah, and I agree here, Lee, especially if he's able to elevate what Seattle did this year, just kind of on that Liam Cohen track. And you're actually entering a situation where the OC was let go. He wasn't given a head coaching job like Dave Canales. So if you kind of turn that offense around, implement some play action, implement or emphasize the running game, and you're able to keep Geno from 40 straight dropbacks a game with very little motion and very little play action to kind of buoy the offensive line. If you're able to get away from these really static concepts that they fell into last season, and diversify the offense, I think for sure you'll start getting some head coaching looks, for sure. Especially with the pedigree, nepotism be damned. These guys who grew up around the game are just going to have those things come more naturally. I think in coaching, when people bitch about the nepotism, I think it makes sense a little bit when it's, Steve Belichick just having an automatic job on Bill's staff, or Norv Turner and Scott Turner just palling around wherever Scott gets a job. Norv's like, I'll come in and advise. Or when Norv had the OC gig with the Vikings following his stint with the Chargers, and Scott came and Norv quit mid-season, and he was like, Scott will do it. That kind of stuff is a little goofy when they're like paired. But if you just think about like why wouldn't the son of Mike Shanahan have why wouldn't he have a better handle on how to run an offense than 99.9% of living humans? He's been around it his whole life. I think there's something to be said about that goes beyond just it's not the kind of nepotism of like the rich guy in town who, the cops never arrest his son, even though his son's a fuckhead. it's not really nepotism like that way. It's more like it's based much more on merit than like the, oh, they let him into this, they let him into Harvard because his dad went there. It's a little different than that. There's some acquired knowledge and acquired things that just, you're not going to have if you didn't grow up with a dad, a head coach for a dad. So, all right. Well, that's all we've got for you folks. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching, listening, wherever you are. Thanks to all those that commented. Hit the like button on your way out if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be back next Tuesday to preview the Super Bowl. It'll be a big deep dive on the Super Bowl next week. We kind of got all the other stuff out of the way just now. That's why I was talking all fast. But next week we'll really be able to slow down and really break it down for you guys. So looking forward to that. Stick around in the meantime. Ben, let the people know where they can find you and the rest of your work.
Yeah, thank you. Sports and Money, KC. It's over on YouTube. So tonight we took a look we took a week off from the Super Bowl. We took an early look at the top 15 wide receivers and tight ends available in free agency. Again, free agency is sloppy, but we took a starting look at that. And then we did a New England Patriots 3-round mock draft where we actually sat down, 3 of us, and talked war room style. And then we had one guy doing the role of GM, made the final decision. So 2 really good segments over there, that Sports and Money KC on YouTube.
Perfect. And you know what? I didn't even tell you my favorite hire. I don't know how I got distracted on the Clint Kubiak rant. But mine's Vrabel. Mine's Vrabel, and I think it's because you're pairing him with Drake May. And he's been able to get more with less every season in Tennessee without like a true blue ascending franchise quarterback.
Yeah.
So I like that one a lot. And then coordinator, obviously I like Kubiak to Seattle. But I think I'm going to go Lou Anarumo to the Colts. It's a much needed kind of switch up for them. Might allow them to kind of have more avenues to pursue as they try to draft cornerbacks. You can look for some more man heavy guys. You're not going to be married to this like deep third archetype, long use the boundary as a second defender kind of guys. He's running Legion of Boom levels of cover 3. It kind of narrows your scope as you're looking to fill out that secondary. So I really like Lou Anarumo there. I think he's got more existing talent in Indy right now than he did this past season in Cincy, and they've got an off season to fill the rest of it out with him as part of that brainstorming team. So like that one, like Vrabel. And yeah, you can find me in the meantime. All my written work's up on zonecoverage.com/Vikings. Will be published tomorrow morning, as I understand it. I have a piece tier ranking free agents, potential Vikings free agents. But if you're not a Vikings fan, this will apply to your team as well, because I've got contract projections and little quips about it'll end up being, I think, 26 free agents split into 5 tiers. So if you have any common needs with the Vikings, it'll be extremely applicable to your favorite team as well. Or just, if you're not sure who's going to be out there, a lot of the big names will be in that piece that will be live tomorrow on zonecoverage.com. And you'll catch us here. I've been throwing this pencil around. I've been really talking with the pencil handle up. You can find us here next week on Bite Size Sports for another episode of Necessary Roughness. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Oh, no. It's happening again. Stay right with us, guys.